All right, good afternoon. Welcome back to Boca Raton, Florida. Let's talk about how the American dream is getting more and more unaffordable and harder and harder to achieve. So increasingly harder to achieve this American dream. And by the American dream, I mean, moving up the social economic ladder. I mean, buying decent things, having a decent house, having a couple of decent cars, being able to go on vacation a couple times a year, educating your kids, sending them off to college. That is the American dream that I'm talking about. And that's getting harder and harder to achieve and more impossible to obtain. My wife retired at the age of 41 for her 41st birthday 9 years ago. And I retired at 43. Was it 42 and a half, 43? Something like that. Anyway, I've been retired for 6.5 years. We're currently 50, both of us. And if we had to do it all over again, could we retire at the same time, in our early 40s? I highly doubt it. I highly, highly doubt it. No matter how hard you work, and we worked our asses off too, my wife was working routinely 70, sometimes 80 hours a week at her private industry, what did she do? She was in finance. She did something with computers and finance, anyway. She made a good amount of money, was able to amass what we call the freedom number, an amount that was equivalent or enough to replace my pension. Okay, so that was our freedom number. My freedom number is equivalent to my pension, my annual pension, which pays for our basic living. So should shit hit the fan, and we no longer can take vacations like this, and we won't have a couple of nice cars. I used Lexus and her old Porsche. If we can't afford those nice things, well then we just simply shrink down and just stay home, do staycations. And but my pension would be able to pay for all our basic living, our basic housing, a couple of used cars, and basic eating without eating out, etc. But if we had to do all over again today, there's no way that we'd be able to do what we did. Okay, and this is why I tell my kids that they're going to have to work harder for less, unfortunately, and to expect that this is a tougher circumstance for everybody, for every American. Okay, for vast majority of Americans, right? The top 0.1% or 1% are still going to have it the same way. They're going to keep getting richer, and they won't even need to work. But the rest of us, everybody below that, we're all going to have to work harder for less. Unless you're long retired like me. But even then, the rate of increase in my 401k is not going to be as dramatic as it was during the last 30 years. Anyway, just because assets are more expensive and wages haven't kept up with the price of assets, such as cars and houses and college tuition, doesn't mean that you're not going to try, right? You still have to work hard if you want to be able to save, if you want to be able to retire at a decent time, at a decent age, if you still want to buy a decent piece of property, if you still want to be able to lease or own a couple of decent cars and go on vacations, not anything outrageous, of course. So it's the same thing I tell my kids all the time. Let's compare when I first came out. When I first started working in 1997, my salary was $28,000 a year, and my wife's salary was $32,000. Not too different, but I was in civil service. I was a cop for 22 years, so my salary increases per year were basically $1,000, $2,000 until I hit top pay of $50,000. That last bump in my 6th year, that last bump was almost $10,000. So for the first 5 years, it was like, okay, you're making 28, now you're making 29, 30, 31, 32, and then all of a sudden it went to 46 or 45 or whatever it was, close to $50,000. But for her, it was like, okay, she started at 32,000, The next year she made 42, 52, 75, 100, 125, 200, you know, so those were her salary increases. But that first year, in 1997, I made 28,000, she made 32,000. The co-op, the first co-op that we bought 3 years later cost us $60,000 in 2000. But in 1997, had we had the money, we could have bought that co-op for $30,000 in Queens. Okay, $30,000 for a one-bedroom co-op in Queens. So that's 1 times my salary. Today, the average cop starting out makes $50,000, but that co-op is $250,000. So the price of assets has gone up. That particular asset, at least housing, has gone up 5 times. Meanwhile, the average salary has gone up 2 times. So that's just an example to show you why the American dream is getting more and more unaffordable and unattainable. And it's unfortunate, but that, you know, future generations, my kids, you guys who are, if you're, you know, my kids' age, you're going to have a harder time. But that's not to say, you know, that you shouldn't try and work hard and move yourself up the ranks, because, you know, that's the only way to get out of this rat race. You know, it may take longer, it may take a longer time, it may take more effort to get out of the rat race, but it's still worth it to retire 5, 10, 15, 20 years earlier than everybody else. So the same rules, the same tricks of the trade, the same rules of thumb still apply to, you know, today versus 30 years ago when I first started, right? So you're still gonna have to save a very decent amount of money if you wanna retire early. You still wanna invest somewhat aggressively in the S&P 500 or any large basket of stocks, indexes, right? Not individual stocks. You know, if you want to get rich faster, you know, you can try picking stocks. You can try putting, you know, your money in crypto, etc. But if I was going to do that, you know, the money that I put into individual stocks, I like to think that, you know, I can lose it, I can gain it fast, but I can also lose it a lot faster. So I never look at that as money that I need. If I need to put it into, if I want to put a certain amount of money into individual stocks or crypto, it's money that I can afford to lose. Okay, it's money that I can afford to lose. It's literally akin to gambling. It's quite close to gambling. So that's how I view that. So any other money, 95% of your money should be, excuse me, doing some work downstairs. 95% of the money should be in some sort of large basket of stock indexes, right? All right, sorry about that noise. They're doing some construction downstairs with the pavers. Anyway, so the American dream is harder to achieve, and things are getting a lot more expensive, while wages have pretty much been stagnant, if you've been keeping track, have been stagnant for almost the last 30, 40, maybe 50 years. Again, that doesn't mean, as I tell my kids, that doesn't mean that you don't try anymore, right? You still want to retire earlier than most people. You still want to retire earlier than 63. You still want to be able to do a couple of vacations like this. So you're going to have to save harder, work harder, invest harder, unfortunately, to get less of a return. But still, you know, it's the only way out of the rat race. All right, so, all right, keep chugging away. And, you know, it may be further, the horizon might be a little further out, but doesn't mean it's impossible to achieve. You're just going to have to work harder for it. Okay? This is Boca Raton, Florida. Be well.